Chosen one, what happened was never meant to flatter you, and it was never designed to inspire admiration. When your life entered academic space at the highest level, it did not arrive as a story, it arrived as a problem. Not a moral problem, a structural one. Harvard did not look at you searching for role models or success narrative. It noticed a pattern that refused to behave according to established logic. And when logic breaks, institutions do not celebrate. They investigate. Your life did not fit linear cause and effect framework. Decisions that should have failed didn't. Constraints that should have limited you collapsed without visible force. Outcomes arrived without proportional input, and effort did not correlate cleanly with reward. This created a contradiction that could not be dismissed as anecdotal noise. When contradictions repeat across context, they stop being coincidence and start becoming instructional. That is when a life becomes material. You were not studied because you succeeded. You were examined because your trajectory violated expectation while remaining internally consistent. Consistency without predictability is a rare anomaly. It forces a re-evaluation of underlying assumptions. Systems that teach logic are threatened not by chaos, but by coherence that arrives from outside approved models. Your life demonstrated a form of reasoning that did not announce itself as logic, yet produced logical resolution every time. That is what made it impossible. This is where you must understand the difference between intelligence and impossibility. Intelligence fits inside systems. Impossibility forces systems to expand. What Harvard observed was not brilliance acting within rules, but alignment operating beyond them. You were not solving problems by optimizing variables. You were repositioning the premise entirely. That made traditional evaluation useless. Evaluation measures performance against criteria. Your life questioned the criteria themselves. The moment your trajectory entered academic discussion, something fundamental changed. It was no longer about who you were. It was about what your existence implied. When students began encountering your life as a lesson, it was not framed as biography. It was framed as contradiction analysis. Why does this path work when it shouldn't? What assumptions must be false for this outcome to exist? These are dangerous questions in any rigorous system. But they are also necessary ones if truth is to advance. You may never be named openly in those rooms. That is intentional. Naming would collapse the lesson into personality. Keeping you abstract preserves the force of the contradiction. Your life becomes a variable, not an identity. A case where logic must bend without breaking. And that is exactly how impossible logic is taught, through patterns that force reasoning instead of reward imitation. For you, this phase carries weight that feels unfamiliar. You may feel removed from your own story at times, as if your experiences no longer belong only to you. That sensation is not loss. It is scale increasing. Once a life becomes instructional, it stops being interpreted solely through emotion. It becomes structural evidence. Evidence does not care how it feels. It only cares that it holds. You were not invited into the classroom. Your life entered it on its own. And once impossible logic proves stable, it cannot be untaught. This is where the arc begins, not with admiration, but with scrutiny. There is a reason your life was never framed as a success story, a motivational arc, or a triumph narrative. Those formats are safe. They preserve existing structures by implying that results are achievable if one follows the correct step. Your life offered no steps that could be copied cleanly. When Harvard examines material, it does so to extract transferable logic. In your case, transfer failed. Not because your outcomes were vague, but because repeating your inputs did not reproduce your result. That is when a life stops being inspirational and starts being interrogated. What the institution encountered was not genius outperforming limits, but coherence bypassing them. Traditional logic tolerates excellence. It cannot tolerate exceptions that refuse explanation. Your decisions did not optimize within a model. They invalidated the model's assumptions quietly, without attack. You did not break rules in ways that could be corrected. You acted in ways the rules never anticipated. That distinction forced scholars into an uncomfortable position: either dismiss your life as anomaly or accept that their frameworks were incomplete. Dismissing worked temporarily. Repetition made it impossible. So your life was reframed, not as achievement but as case friction, a point where reasoning stalls. Students were not asked to admire you. They were asked to sit inside contradiction, to watch outcomes arrive without proportional cause, to analyze moments where restraint produced expansion, waiting created acceleration, and withdrawal generated leverage. None of these fit linear logic, yet none violated reality. That tension is the birthplace of impossible logic. You may find it unsettling that the most elite minds did not ask, "How can we replicate this?" They asked, "Why doesn't replication apply?" That is a far deeper question. Replication assumes surface-level causality. Your life rejected surface causality entirely. It suggested that alignment, timing, and internal structure rerouted causality beneath observation. This possibility threatens a system that relies on predictability for authority. Yet it also excites a system committed to truth. That is why your life entered curriculum without credit. There is another layer that rarely gets discussed. Your trajectory carried moral neutrality. It did not reward goodness or punish failure in expected ways. Events unfolded without obeying conventional fairness. This forced students to separate logic from comfort. Most reasoning frameworks are quietly biased toward what feels just. Your life forced logic to operate without emotional safeguard. Results arrived because they aligned, not because they were deserved. That clarity is uncomfortable but honest. You may also notice that your story resists summarization. Whenever someone tries to describe it briefly, it distorts. Key elements refuse compression. This is a sign of non-reducible logic. Systems prefer reducible examples because they teach cleanly. You could not be reduced without erasing what mattered. So the lesson became ongoing rather than concluded. Each examination revealed something new, not because facts changed, but because interpretation matured. Importantly, this was never about elevating you above others. It was about humility forced onto logic itself. When intellectual authority admits limitation, progress begins. Your life became the pressure point that forced that admission. You were not celebrated for brilliance. You were respected as evidence that something real was happening beyond current understanding. That respect does not sound like praise because it is not. It is restraint. Your life was used carefully, indirectly, without attribution, because attaching a personality would have weakened the lesson. Once a name enters, imitation follows. Imitation fails. Failure discredits truth prematurely. So your identity was removed to preserve accuracy. This is why your role feels paradoxical. You are central without being center stage. Foundational without being visible. Your life is present as logic stress test, not as example to follow. That is a heavier burden than admiration. It asks nothing from you directly, yet places weight on your consistency going forward. Once a life becomes a reference, its coherence must continue. They did not teach who you are. They taught where logic stops working. And sometimes that is the most powerful lesson a system can offer. What unsettled the classroom was not that your life produced rare outcomes, but that no corrective framework could be applied to it. Normally, when logic fails, theory expands. When theory fails, exceptions are isolated. When isolation fails, the case is dismissed. None of those exits worked with you. Your life refused isolation because it remained consistent across environments. It resisted dismissal because results continued appearing long after scrutiny began. This forced a rare academic posture: suspension of conclusion. Instead of fixing the anomaly, logic had to sit with it. Blessed by his grace? Click Super Thank You and give $20 to spread his light. Your gift plants seeds that grow his kingdom. Be the blessing. At this stage, your life was no longer examined as sequence, but as architecture. Scholars stopped asking what you did and started asking what conditions made those actions functional. They noticed that your choices often appeared minimal while producing disproportionate effect. That restraint contradicted dominant models that reward accumulation, optimization, and aggression. Yet restraint kept winning. Waiting collapsed timelines. Silence produced leverage. Detachment created opportunity. Each of these violated standard instructional logic, yet together they formed a stable pattern. Students were asked to consider something uncomfortable. Maybe outcomes are not driven by effort, intelligence, or positioning alone, but by coherence between internal state and external timing. That suggestion was not mystical. It was structural. Your life demonstrated that when internal alignment is precise, reality reduces friction automatically. Logic that cannot factor internal state prefers to ignore it. Your case made ignoring it impossible. This created an unusual effect in the classroom. Arguments stopped being competitive and became exploratory. There was no correct answer to extract. Any attempt to claim certainty collided with another layer of evidence. Professors resisted premature synthesis because synthesis would imply mastery. There was none. The lesson was not resolution. It was humility enforced by reality. That is rare in elite instruction. You should understand why this mattered so deeply. Institutions like Harvard exist to teach how systems work. Your life suggested that systems are downstream from alignment, not upstream from control. That inversion threatens every discipline built on prediction. Yet it also unlocks a new domain of logic that does not collapse under uncertainty. Instead of asking how to win within a system, the question became how to become something the system adapts to automatically. There was another detail quietly noted but rarely voiced. Your life did not centralize power. It decentralized it. Influence moved without command. Change arrived without leadership roles. Outcomes manifested without authority labels. This contradicted foundational assumptions about hierarchy. If impact can occur without position, what does position really measure? That question alone destabilizes entire academic disciplines. So it was approached carefully, indirectly, through your case rather than asserted outright. For you personally, this period reshapes self-perception in subtle ways. You may feel that explanations you once relied on no longer satisfy you. Others' advice feels incomplete. Not wrong, just insufficient. This is because you have become evidence of a logic that operates beyond instruction. You are no longer learning how things work. You are living inside how they already do. In the classroom, your case did not end with answers. It ended with better questions. Questions that cannot be resolved through formulas or template. questions that demand awareness, timing, and restraint. Those are not qualities institutions usually teach. Yet they had no choice. The lesson existed whether acknowledged or not. Your life became impossible logic not because it defied reason, but because it revealed where reason had been artificially narrowed. That revelation does not produce applause. It produces silence, note-taking, and careful revisions of theory. It becomes a lesson students carry quietly, one that reshapes how they interpret success, failure, effort, and control long after the course ends. You were never positioned as a goal. You were positioned as a boundary. And boundaries, once discovered, redefine the map entirely. At some point in the analysis, something subtle but irreversible happened. Students stopped trying to solve your life and started questioning the equations they were using to examine it. This is the exact moment a case stops being academic material and becomes philosophical pressure. The formulas still worked everywhere else, but not here. Effort no longer scaled outcomes. Strategy no longer guaranteed advantage. Risk did not correlate with reward. And yet nothing about your life was chaotic. That contradiction forced a realization most systems resist. The logic wasn't wrong, it was partial. This is where the term impossible logic quietly appeared. Not spoken as criticism, not framed as mysticism, but used as a placeholder for something logic could not yet articulate. Impossible did not mean irrational. It meant unreachable through current tools. Your life behaved logically according to rules that had not been formalized. That distinction shifted the entire posture of analysis. If the rules were missing, then the task was not evaluation, it was discovery. What caught attention most was not your outcomes, but your timing. Moves that should have been premature work. Moves that should have been delayed arrived effortlessly. Periods of stillness preceded breakthroughs with suspicious consistency. Traditional models treat waiting as inefficiency. Your life treated waiting as preparation invisible to measurement. That forced students to confront a blind spot in rational systems. Timing without visible cause. Another fracture appeared when control variables were examined. Every serious discipline assumes some form of leverage, something that can be adjusted to influence trajectory. Your life demonstrated moments where leverage clearly existed but was never pulled, yet outcomes still aligned. In some cases, pulling leverage would have made things worse. This contradicted one of the most sacred assumptions of applied logic, that intervention improves result. Your case suggested that restraint could outperform action when alignment was precise. There was also discomfort around replication. Students often approach case studies asking, "What can I do differently now?" With your life, that question collapsed. Replicating behavior led to failure. Replicating mindset led to confusion. Replicating timing proved impossible. This forced an uncomfortable shift. Maybe the lesson was not about copying actions, but about cultivating internal accuracy. Internal accuracy has no syllabus, yet it clearly existed. Professors observed something else quietly. Students stopped competing for the right explanation. The room became unusually quiet during discussions about your case. Not because interest faded, but because certainty did. And certainty is usually rewarded in academic environments. Here, it was penalized. The more confident an explanation sounded, the more it broke under scrutiny. Humility became the only stable posture. That alone made your life instructional beyond logic. It reshaped behavior. You may feel detached from this process, as if your life has moved beyond your own understanding. That is normal. When lived reality becomes reference material, subjective experience loses centrality. What remains is pattern. And patterns operate whether you narrate them or not. This can feel lonely, but it is also clarifying. You no longer need to explain yourself to fit frameworks that already admitted limitation. The students did not learn how to become you. They learned that becoming aligned might matter more than becoming optimized. That realization does not show up on exams. It shows up years later, in choices made when no one is watching. That is why your life stayed in the curriculum quietly. Not as proof, as permission to doubt incomplete systems. And once doubt enters a disciplined mind, logic evolves, or it stagnates. Your life forced evolution. Eventually, the discussion reached a limit where pushing further no longer produced clarity. That is the moment when something rare happens in elite learning environments. The case is no longer treated as an exception. It becomes a reference point. Your life crossed that threshold quietly. Instead of asking why it didn't fit, the question shifted to what else had been misunderstood all along. The anomaly stopped being you. The anomaly became the system that failed to account for you. This shift mattered more than any conclusion could have. Once scholars accept that a framework is incomplete, they begin searching for what lies outside its edges. Your life functioned as that edge. Not jagged, not chaotic, but precise enough to draw a boundary logic hadn't seen before. Impossible logic was no longer spoken as frustration. It was spoken as invitation. Invitation to build something larger, rather than pretending the existing model was sufficient. What made this realization stick was your consistency over time. An anomaly that appears once can be dismissed. A contradiction that holds under pressure becomes inconvenient. But one that remains stable across years, across circumstances, across emotional states forces humility. Your life didn't spike and collapse. It didn't burn brightly and disappear. It held. That persistence transformed curiosity into respect. Respect does not announce itself loudly in academic spaces. It changes how carefully something is handled. You should understand how rare this is. Most lives are useful as examples within a theory. Yours was useful only in demonstrating where theory ended. That is why lectures didn't resolve your case. They returned to it periodically, from different angles, testing whether new tools could finally contain it. Each time, the result was the same: partial insight followed by restraint. Restraint is what appears when intelligence recognizes its limit. This stage introduced a quiet but profound implication. If outcomes can align without being engineered, maybe control is overvalued. If alignment can outperform optimization, maybe effort is being misunderstood. Those thoughts are destabilizing not because they are mystical, but because they reassign responsibility. They place weight back on awareness, coherence, and internal accuracy, qualities difficult to quantify, difficult to teach, and impossible to guarantee. Students began leaving those sessions differently than they entered. Not energized, not inspired, but unsettled in a productive way. Their assumptions felt less solid. Their strategies felt narrower. They did not know what to replace them with yet. That discomfort is the mark of real learning. It does not produce answers immediately. It produces better questions that follow people into real decisions. For you, this stage represents a turning inward. You may notice that validation from intellectual authority feels irrelevant now. Not because you oppose it, but because something deeper has already been confirmed. You are not waiting for permission to exist inside logic. You are evidence that logic must grow. That realization does not inflate ego. It quiets it. When you know you are not meant to fit, the urge to force belonging disappears. The impossible part of the logic was never the outcome. It was the realization that internal coherence could rewrite external structure without confrontation. That truth does not resolve cleanly. It lingers. It reshapes silently. And once accepted, it cannot be unseen. Without announcement, something subtle shifted in how the material was taught. Not the title of the course, not the syllabus on paper, but the emphasis beneath the words. Your life was no longer presented as a curiosity examined at the margins. It became a reference teachers oriented themselves around when discussing limits of rational control. When new theories were introduced, they were quietly checked against your case. Not to invalidate the theories outright, but to test whether they accounted for what already existed. Many did not. That absence began shaping the direction of instruction itself. This is how real change happens in institutions that last centuries. Nothing dramatic, no public admission, no declaration of error. The curriculum bends incrementally around what cannot be ignored. Lectures subtly adjust tone. Questions shift from "how do we optimize?" to "under what conditions does optimization fail?" Your life provided a living answer that logic alone could not generate. And once that answer exists, it must be dealt with, even if it cannot yet be fully articulated. You may not realize how rare it is for a lived reality to influence abstraction at that level. Most examples are retrofitted to prove a point already accepted. Yours arrived first. It preceded explanation. That reversed order is uncomfortable for academic systems because it places truth ahead of theory. Yet ignoring it would have meant teaching something known to be incomplete. Integrity demanded adjustment. So, quietly it happened. One of the most telling changes was the language used in discussion. Certainty softened. Words like always, necessarily, and guarantees appeared less frequently. In their place came tens, often, under certain conditions. This may sound minor, but language signals epistemology. When absolutes fade, responsibility increases. Students must think instead of recite. Your life forced that shift without being named as the cause. Another impact was less visible but deeper. Students began asking different kinds of questions, not about how to win systems, but about when systems stop applying, about how to recognize inflection points that no model predict, about the role of awareness in decision-making under uncertainty. These questions do not produce easy answers, but they produce adaptable thinkers. And adaptability, not brilliance, is what determines long-term relevance. For you, this moment aligns with a personal realization. You no longer need external frameworks to approve your way of moving through the world. When institutions change to accommodate a pattern you live instinctively, validation becomes unnecessary. You are not against systems. You simply operate where they thin out. That clarity removes the pressure to justify yourself. You don't need to be right. You need to be coherent. The curriculum did not change to honor you. It changed to stay honest. And honesty, once adjusted, cannot return to comfortable simplifications. Future students may never know your case existed in its original form. They will simply inherit a logic slightly wider than before. That is how influence hides in plain sight, embedded rather than announced. Your life did not rewrite textbooks overnight. It rewrote assumptions slowly. And assumptions, once altered, change generations quietly. What finally emerged from all of this was not a conclusion, but a shift in orientation, both for those studying your life and for you yourself. The lesson reached a point where further explanation stopped adding value. At that moment, your life ceased to function as a teaching tool and became a positioning force. the distinction matters. Teaching transfers knowledge. Positioning alters how knowledge is used. Once that transition occurs, the material no longer belongs to the classroom alone. It moves into decision-making, leadership behavior, and long-term judgment. What Harvard ultimately encountered was not a riddle to be solved, but a boundary to be respected. Your life marked the edge of what structured logic could claim confidently. Beyond that edge, humility replaced assertion. Awareness replaced dominance. Timing replaced control. That did not weaken logic, it preserved it. Frameworks that refuse to recognize their limits eventually collapse. Those that adapt survive. Your case forced adaptation simply by remaining real. This is why, near the end of discussion cycles, something unusual happened. Professors stopped asking students what could be concluded and started asking what must be left open. Leaving something open is uncomfortable in elite environments. Open questions cannot be graded easily. They cannot be optimized. Yet they are often the most important. Your life demanded openness because closing it prematurely would have falsified reality. That restraint is the true academic respect you were given. For you, this stage carries a subtle but permanent shift in self-location. You may sense that you are no longer on the path to becoming something defined. You are already situated. Choices now feel less like experiments and more like placements. When things don't fit, they fall away quickly. When they do fit, they lock in with little friction. This is not certainty as confidence. It is certainty as resonance. You recognize what aligns without debate. You also stop borrowing language from others to explain yourself. Borrowed language compresses lived truth. Once your life became a reference, compression stopped working. You may speak less now, not because you have less to say, but because what you carry doesn't require constant articulation. Silence becomes efficient. Movement becomes deliberate. You stop narrating the process and start inhabiting it. The most important realization here is this. Your life was never meant to teach people how to replicate outcomes. It was meant to show where blind confidence in systems fails. That awareness does not spread quickly or loudly. It spreads through subtle recalibration of judgment. People make different decisions years later without remembering why. Systems evolve without crediting the trigger. That is how deep influence operates. You are no longer an example in motion. You are a reference in place. The classroom did not graduate you. It stabilized around you. And once something causes thought itself to shift, it does not end with a lesson. It continues as orientation, quiet, durable, and impossible to unlearn.